Robert Aldrich, and this is his 1972 Western Ulzana's Raid, starring Burt Lancaster and Bruce Davidson, Richard Jaeckel, and Jorge Luke. I've always been a big fan of Ulzana's Raid. It's written by Alan Sharp, who wrote the script for The Last Run that we had done earlier. He also wrote the script for Night Moves and for another really terrific Western called The Hired Hand. And Ulzana's Raid has always kind of been my favorite script of his. The Last Run might be competing with it now because I really held on to The Last Run since we watched it again.
Damnation Alley.
Well, yes.
It's just one of my childhood ecstatic experiences.
I'm down for
every time I hear Alan Sharp, I have to scream out Damnation Alley.
I'm down with us watching Damnation Alley sometime. Okay, so here is the me reading the back of the box for Ulzana's Raid. Violence begets violence in this explosive Western that pits marauding Apaches against wary Indian fighters and naive U.S. cavalrymen. Burt Lancaster stars in this sharply written, fact-based story as a scout assigned to aid the cavalry in tracking down Ulzana and his band of renegade Indians. As the trail gets hotter, Lancaster attempts to teach an idealistic young lieutenant that the only way to fight the Apaches' escalating brutality and violence is with even stronger force. Robert Aldrich directs this gritty action epic sure to excite both the senses and the intellect. And you would find this in the Western section under U. So I've always been a big fan of Ulzana's Raid for a couple different reasons. One, I really like the script. I love a lot of the performances in the film. But one of the things that I really appreciate the most is Alan Sharp was he's a Scottish writer, and he's one of the foremost authorities of screenwriters when it came to the history of the American West, and especially of the realities of the U.S. Cavalry Apache Wars. And now, one of the things about Robert Aldrich from the late 60s on is he was very affected by the Vietnam War. He never made a Vietnam War movie per se, but he dealt with the Vietnam War in like a few of his films. Dirty Dozen has a Vietnam aspect. It's one of the reasons that why the film was so popular, because it has a very anti-military aspect at a time that there was a high anti-military aspect to the country because of the war. Ulzana's Raid is a complete Vietnam allegory, as was other Indian blue coat westerns of that time. Little Big Man was another one, and Ralph Nelson's Soldier Blue is another one. And then he goes and makes Twilight's Last Gleaming, which is just a movie where he can just vent his entire feelings about the Vietnam War. Now, there was a lot of Vietnam allegories made in the first half of the 70s because for whatever reason they weren't allowed to make. No one wanted to actually commit to actually making a real movie about Vietnam.
Too soon.
Yeah. And in a world where Ciro H. Santiago has 30 movies made about Vietnam, watching Vietnam War allegories seem a little quaint. The exception to me is Ulzana's Raid. I think it's one of the most realistic movies about the Apache Wars and the U.S. Cavalry. This is really a war movie. It's not really a Western. This takes the Apache Wars as a genuine military conflict. And it matches up to the whole idea of the Vietnam War because with the Apaches, like the Vietnamese, you have a guerrilla army.
Yeah, they're terrorists, basically.
You have a guerrilla army fighting using the terrain in a way that only they know how, a terrain that they know backwards and forwards, against a giant military machine that only has shock and awe at its disposal. But in a guerrilla war, shock and awe can be just as much a hindrance as anything else. The Apaches are coming from the same place the Vietnamese are coming from. We are resistance fighters fighting the occupying army.
This is our home.
And the only thing, to put as much death and blood and suffering on the occupiers is the goal. Now, Ulzana's Raid tells the particular story of a bunch of Indians living on the reservation in Arizona, And they've long since given up their freedom, long since moved to the agency, what they call them, the agency, long since moved to being fed by the agency, long since moved to the reservation. And Ulzana, and it's suggested about maybe 9 to 12 other Apaches went with him to go off on a raid. Now, a raid is to go and literally, they're on their way to Mexico, and they're going to burn, rape, murder, and pillage everybody that comes in their path on their course to Mexico.
And they have such a reputation of commitment to the terror that they inflict that people in this reality are so terrified of encountering them or being caught with them that they would rather shoot themselves dead than fight a bunch of screaming Apaches.
Yeah, or more to be captured by a bunch of screaming Apaches. And what's going to happen to
nothing is worse than that. They will play with you for fun.
Yeah, nothing.
And by play with you, I mean they will vivisect you slowly for fun.
And the point is made very clearly that Ulzana is just a regular Indian. He's not some like great warrior. He's not this like legendary chief. No, he's just, it's described very well by Jorge Luke as Kinete in the film. It's like, nah, he's just a man he's got the agency smell in him. He has the smell of the dog. He has the smell of the woman. He has the smell of the agency clothes. He has the smell of this. You know, he needs new smell. He needs the smell of fire. He needs the smell of burning. He needs the smell of blood. He needs the smell of the horses. So Ulzana goes off on his raid, and so a young know-nothing lieutenant straight out of West Point, played by Bruce Davidson, is assigned the task of going out, capturing and apprehending Ulzana and his people and bringing them back. And he's given an extremely experienced Indian scout in the guise of Burt Lancaster playing a character named McIntosh, who understands the terrain and understands the Apaches in a way that Bruce Davidson or none of the other bluecoats that are after them have an understanding of. And Burt Lancaster has his own assistant, which is an Apache working with him named Kinete, played by the famous Mexican movie star Jorge Luke, who's just fantastic in the film. And so it's this posse, basically. The army's more of a posse than anything else. But, you know, it's a true military conflict because they can't quite catch them the way that they're going. And then the smallness of the Apaches and their brutality towards situations are going to always give them the slight edge.
Aldrich sets this up so that we understand like all the military action as it plays out. He explains that the reason they can do what they can do and get the distance they can is because they will drive their horses into the ground and then they'll just steal more and then continue on.
And then,
for example, they'll use unconventional means to achieve what they need to achieve.
It's very interesting because Ulzana is very much like a general plotting and scheming and strategizing. But for the most part, so is Burt Lancaster, and it's very interesting when there becomes a break in the strategy. And think, oh, hey, that could kind of work.
Yeah. It's good. And Burt Lancaster, from his perspective, it's like we are playing a kind of 3-dimensional chess type game, and one false move, you die.
Yeah.
One false move, he gets us.
Yeah.
And so he's constantly using his experience and his understanding.
They make the mistake
of the Apache people.
They make the mistake. Well, we're going to just keep on going until somebody makes a mistake. And when somebody makes a mistake, they're going to die.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
So I've been a big fan of this movie for a long time, and I was happy to finally get a chance to show it to you. Roger, what did you think of Ulzana's Raid?
I was absolutely blown away because I was not expecting. I mean, I know Aldrich is a director of, masculine brutality, that he's good at that, but I wasn't really expecting him to embrace it so deeply. Mm-hmm. And there came that moment where I couldn't believe what my eyes were looking at when he was showing the extent to which the Apaches would go in cutting somebody up.
And they're shock and awe.
Ripping out their heart and then throwing it around like a softball and playing with it. They're just having fun. Mm-hmm. That's just their way of having fun. And so I wasn't really prepared. I was as prepared as Bruce Davison. I heard Bruce Davison in an interview on the Blu-ray or the DVD. He gave a hilarious story, which was like a total story that would happen with Roger Avery. He when he first met with Robert Aldrich, he was young and he was just such a big fan and he was just so excited. And it's like, he's just like this young kid and he's meeting with Robert Aldrich, who's like one of his heroes, and he meets with them and he's like, "Oh, sir, I just have to tell you, I am your biggest fan. I loved the Sand Pebbles." And Robert Aldrich says, "Wow, that's fine, kid, except that was directed by Robert Wise. You got the job." And it was because he later told him, he said, "It's because you were innocent and an asshole all at once. Like you didn't know enough to be smart about it." And that's who this kid is.
Well,
it was a total Roger moment. Like I would have absolutely done that. Like,
congratulated Brian De Palma on the King Kong remake.
Congratulations on King Kong. I would have completely made that boneheaded mistake. But that was what got him the part, because his character is meant to. He's there because he wants to be there.
No, Robert Aldrich is
he's foolishly they're like, "Oh, I'm sorry you got sacked with this this detail, kid. You're out here in Apache country." "Oh no, I wanted to see action." "Like, you did?" Yeah. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to send you after Ulzana." "Thank you, sir. It's not a present."
"Don't thank me. I'm not doing you any favors." He keeps thanking everybody. Okay, stop that. All right.
And so the idea, taking that Bruce Davison character and then clashing him with, coming off of George C. Scott, another man of, heroic levels of testosterone, Lancaster, who's just incredible on screen, in downplaying everything. He's so incredible on screen. Bruce Davison is, getting uppity and dancing around and complaining and
one of my favorite
showboating.
One of my favorite lines that Burt Lancaster has in the film is they're trying to figure out how far ahead Ulzana is, and they have a horse apple, and they're picking it up, and Kenete, the Indian scout, is there. Burt Lancaster, "Well, Kenete says this horse apple is about 4 hours old, so that means that they're 4 hours ahead up there." He goes, "Well, do you agree with him?" "I'm not going to argue with an Apache about horse shit. He wrote the book."
There were moments in this that I'm sure the Coen brothers, when they did Buster Scruggs, must have been in love with Ulzana's raid.
I can imagine the Coen brothers having a healthy appreciation for Ulzana's raid,
because that depiction of what it must be like to encounter terror, true terror, like those Apaches coming at you, he captures in this. This is a very real, harsh reality. This is the real world. This movie is based on, real characters. Takes place in around 1886. Grover Cleveland, I think, was president at the time. He comes in a long line of banker presidents, and who are just wanting to push west and open up those lands for development. And so Aldrich captures this world and he infuses it super brightly, and it feels intensely contemporary to me.
Now, oddly enough, Ulzana's Raid has a bit of a companion piece in another movie. And that's a movie from the late 70s called Go Tell the Spartans.
Oh, yeah.
Which was, I think, the second of the big Vietnam movies that came out. First one was, which is magnificent, Boys and Company C. Go Tell the Spartans was the second one. It, too, stars Burt Lancaster. And it's directed, it's like the closest thing that Ted Post, the kind of hacky action director, closest thing he ever did to like an art film. But it matches up with Ulzana's Raid because, to one degree or another, the general or the colonel that Burt Lancaster plays seems like the Macintosh character. Also, Ulzana's Raid is a Vietnam War allegory made about the U.S. cavalry conflict with the Indians. Go Tell the Spartans is a Western Indian military allegory played out in Vietnam.
It's like
it literally is
the mirror image.
It literally
of this movie.
is the flip side. I will say something I've loved Ulzana's Raid. I've been on record for loving Ulzana's Raid. I even wrote a review for it for the New Beverly website. I've been wanting to show it to you for a long time. I liked it a little less this time than I have before. I think the scene with the German rancher left to his own, I think that's a corny scene. I think that actor is a corny actor. I think the way he plays it in a corny way.
He plays it like a German immigrant.
Yeah. Well, that guy's famous for that. Guy is in a zillion westerns. He's always he's the Dutch.
Yeah, he always plays the Dutch guy.
Yeah, he's the Dutch guy. He's the German guy. He's the Swedish guy. He's the Swedish gunsmith. All right, Carl Svensson, I think is his name. But also the woman who's saved from the Apaches and her washing it off. Oh, I have to wash it off. It's all done in this corny, heightened way that is Peckinpah wouldn't do that.
Well, that's why the moments of extreme violence were so intense to me, because the movie feels like a kind of older style film, and then suddenly it has these strikingly modern.
Well, Lancaster's not corny, and Richard Jekyll isn't corny.
No, he's great.
Yeah, but there's Lloyd Bachner is in it, and he's a cornball. All these guys, it's and also Aldrich was not helped by his lovely associates, because that was like their credit. The associates in Aldrich was not always helped as the 60s went into the 70s by his associates. They kept him in a style of filmmaking that is more 62 than 72. Music by Duvall. Duvall's terrible. All right. I don't like Joseph Broccoli, his cinematographer, at all. It just looks like television. It's better. Ulzana's rate is better than most because God's your fucking gaffer out there in Arizona. Nevertheless, he doesn't do him any favors. But by comparison, you look at how Don Siegel in the 60s went through a corny period too, when he was basically just making TV movies for Universal. But then his group of associates, Bruce Surtees on the camera, Lalo Schifrin as a cinematographer, Dean Reisner and Howard Rodman as writers, they took Siegel into the 70s. He was still a modern filmmaker. Dirty Harry is completely and utterly a modern film. All right. And there's no corny elements to it, and not like this. All right. But so that's a situation where those, where the associates can actually take a director, move them over to a new generation, move them to a new style of filmmaking. That didn't happen with Aldrich. And I've never felt that way about Ulzana's Ray, but after seeing it 12 times or so, watching it the last time, that still corny thing is still kind of there.
Yeah, I mean, the only clumsy moment I felt, lost opportunity, and as you're talking about that actor, the
Carl Svensson, but the moment where he hears the bugle and he's lulled to the outside, and we kind of know what's happening. Well, we get it.
But then forget
about that. They stretch it out.
But then with all the dedication to viscera that Aldrich is giving us, he robs us of that moment, which is, I mean, should have been a great moment. And then he tries to use the next shot, which is a shot of the horse of the bugle,
and that's just clumsy.
And it's just clumsy. The bugle is not being used because it's on the guy's hip, so they're not there. But that was really lame.
That's clumsy filmmaking, and that's not clear to an audience what he was trying to do.
I had to struggle myself too.
Yeah, I've seen it a bunch of times, so I knew what he was trying to do, but he didn't do it. And also, it's a real cop-out in that scene, because that's the one of the random incidences that you get to see from beginning to end. Yeah. So it's not that you just wanted to see gruesomeness, even though I have no problem with that. It was, I wanted to see it taken to its logical conclusion.
Well, yeah,
not just told in the aftermath.
This is supposedly happening at every farmstead from there to Mexico.
I wanted that entire vignette played out to one degree or another from beginning to end, not just see an aftermath.
Yeah, I agree.
It's like when he had Aldrich Studios, right? Or
no? He had just lost Aldrich Studios.
So he had just lost it.
So this was his, I need to do something to get back in the game.
Yeah, I mean, and which is I'm glad you actually bring that up, because it actually is one of the strong points about the movie, is Aldrich made so much money on The Dirty Dozen that he was able to buy his own studio, which is Aldrich Studios. And then he proceeded to do 4 or 5 movies that nobody was interested in, nobody went and saw. He ended up losing the studio. This is him throwing his hat back in the ring with the kind of movie you would imagine Robert Aldrich would do, a tough, gritty, violent Western starring an Eisenhower actor like Burt Lancaster. This is him currying favor to get back in the studios after going his own way. And he still makes a very uncompromising, very tough movie. This is not some John Wayne vehicle. This is not a Burt Kennedy movie. This is strong stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I've really enjoyed working on the podcast so far is whenever we have a Western, it's like we've covered like spaghetti Westerns. We've covered, Rustler's Rhapsody is like a play on 40s Westerns and Kitty Matinees, et cetera, et cetera. So watching Ulzana's Raid, I'm like, okay, well, this is clearly like a 70s Western. It's like really early 70s, 72. But like it doesn't feel like a 70s Western to me. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier with Aldrich. It's like he is kind of not stuck in 62, but he's still kind of back there a little bit.
He's still kind of back there a little bit. He's making really rough movies for 1962.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, that sequence where I'm not going to describe the whole thing, but I was a little bit not like asleep, but I was like sitting there thinking, okay, it's like a Western, like I'm getting into it. And then that sequence where it's like, soldier, soldier, don't leave me. And it's the woman on the wagon and she starts shrieking.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I actually gasped audibly. I almost couldn't watch. My hand, I found myself holding my breath with my hand over my mouth at just the brutal violence that ensued. Like it woke me up and I was like, okay, this is what I'm in for in this movie. And it was shocking. It did not disappoint. That scene is like a standout scene for me.
And the stunts in this are absolutely
the horse stunts.
Well, I mean, even beyond the horse stunts, I mean, there's that guy getting clotheslined off of the horse where he literally rides at full speed and gets clotheslined and flips over and like lands into the dirt.
The dirt and rocks.
The dirt and rocks. Like you see him hit the ground and it's like, holy cow. Okay. I was going to complain about all the tripwires on horses and how intense that is to watch with my sensibilities today. But the people are going through the exact same stuff. Aldrich is putting everybody through that that level of stunts.
There's not a horse that doesn't get shot in this movie that doesn't do a fucking somersault.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. It's hard to watch it sometimes, and then it's also like
in
wow,
fact,
there is a commitment
but it's weird.
to getting it in this.
It's weird. I thought running W's were outlawed by 72. All right,
This could have just been very skilled laydowns, without wires.
No. There's that one somersault where it goes like down the hill.
No.
I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt.
The ass does not go up into pointing at a satellite.
Yeah. So if you have sensitivity to that sort of seeing that, then this might not be the movie you want to tune into.
Well,
at least know what you're getting into.
Look, it wasn't against the law back then, so that's what it is. But I thought it was against the law by 72. I mean, maybe they shot it in Mexico, all right, where they were able to be able to do it, but that doesn't sound right. I'm sure they shot it in Arizona.
I think actually when I was researching it, they did shoot in Arizona, New Mexico, I think.
This is a big studio film with Burt Lancaster. If it's outlawed, they're not doing it.
Bruce Davidson's character, I found him very endearing because it's like he is just like the good Christian that just believes that like the good is out there and stuff, and like he still has problems killing. Yeah,
he wants to be like a good Christian to the people who want to kill him in the worst way possible.
Yeah, and he wants to give them all Christian burials, which in his heart is a good thing, but obviously that's not what the Apaches want.
Yeah.
So.
And
it's like a good thing, except he keeps assigning Jorge Luca to do it. Like, you have the Indian bury these, give them a Christian burial. Does that make sense?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic he has because Bruce Davidson, because he wants to be the thinking man and he wants to be the compassionate person and he wants to be the son of the minister. Well, at the same time being a cavalry officer.
It goes from being a cadet to a warrior.
Yeah. But then he's so appalled by what he sees in the aftermath of the Apaches leave that he turns into the biggest Apache hater in the course of it. He completely switches personality at a certain point.
War by its nature will turn you into a fascist.
And his little journey is part of the growth of the movie. It's actually very interesting because Aldrich talks about it. For instance, the character of DeBoone, which is the Bruce Davidson character, goes, the character of DeBoone, for instance, in Ulzana's Raid, he's wrong and he does a bunch of shit the audience doesn't like, but you never really hate him because it's not clear he doesn't know shit. He just doesn't know what's going on. He's in over his head. He doesn't know.
He knows as much as anybody in the audience probably knows.
Yeah.
He's our eyes into the movie. We go in, wanting good out of the world, and then we realize, no, the world is a hard place.
But I think there is an aspect, like from watching it with some other friends of mine at times, it's like, when Bruce Davidson punishes Kinete, all right, for what the other Apaches did by taking his horse away and making him run. With all the shit Ulzana does, you actually hate Bruce Davidson more for doing that than any of the murders that happened earlier in the film.
Yeah.
It's funny. Bruce Davidson talks about Joaquin Martinez, who plays Ulzana.
Yeah. I loved this.
And what a fabulous actor he was. He's a Latino actor, and how much he loved being with them. And he said, oh, he was great. He would say things like, sometimes people get too big and they want refried beans flown in from Guadalajara. I thought that was an amazing quote. Not me. I'm level-headed.
So as the back of the box said, this is loosely based on real events that occurred. So I did just like a little bit of digging, just scratched the surface. I'm sure there's lots more that can be said about this. But Ulzana's raid is actually based on a real Tsokanede Apache warrior named Ulzana, whose nickname is also translated to Tanned Buckskin or the Big Buckskin. In November 1885, Brigadier General George Crook had been pursuing Apache war parties that were led by Geronimo and Chief Chihuahua. Cook learned that 11 of these Apaches were being led by Chihuahua's brother, Ulzana. Ulzana had split off from the larger group, eluded Crawford, and raced past the soldiers who had been placed along the Mexican-American border. So he enacted his raid, and also just sheer terror, with only 11 Mogollon warriors, rode 12,000 miles, killed 36 Pinda and Mexicans, terrified settlers, cowboys, miners, stole stock, and made fun of 2,000 soldiers before he was captured. During the raid, he only lost one soldier who was actually killed by a fellow Apache and escaped to Mexico. He surrendered in December along with his brother Chihuahua and also Chief Nana, and he was kept on reservation until 1909 when he died. The movie is like an amalgamation of this clearly because it's like how it plays out. But I liked this fact, though, that he only lost one soldier who was actually killed by a fellow Apache, because I think it plays really well into how they chose to wrap up Ulzana's raid in the end of this without giving too much away. I thought that was kind of like a nice historical nod to the real history of what happened.
I also thought it was really interesting that Jorge Luca's character, Kinete, I don't want to say he's the traitor to the Apache.
Well, he is.
But he's kind of the traitor to the Apache, and he's kind of the hero of the movie also.
No,
and then by the very end, we realize this might be personal for him. That he's the brother-in-law?
He's the brother-in-law.
He's the brother-in-law
of Ulzana.
Of Ulzana. And so when they meet up in the end, I get the feeling like, you know, maybe he's less of a traitor than I thought he was while watching the movie.
I still think he's a traitor. I mean, look, I think he's one of the coolest characters in the movie, and I think the movie even knows that. There is an aspect. It's one of the things I like about the story. Burt Lancaster is obviously your star, and Bruce Davidson is obviously kind of your lead character, so to speak. Like the character's going to change.
Your window to the world.
Yeah, but you really kind of dig this Kinete character standing off to the side with his like,
handsome and long hair
and his uncanny ability to figure they can't do anything unless Kinete tells them what time it is,
and his desert wisdom that he gives out.
Unless he tells them what time.
But that's the truth.
It's so funny though.
No, we're gonna have to wait here 45 minutes till Kinete comes back because he's the only one that can read the fucking tracks. All right. But then as it goes into its third act, Kinete starts becoming more important. And then they purposely, in a really great Alan Sharp way, he's very good at that, of having a character get shot or something. And then, no, it's not just a little thing. No, it's going to fuck them up. Yeah, it doesn't matter if, I'm not talking about anything in this movie, but it doesn't matter if a character gets shot in the leg. He could die for that, all right? He's not going to die today, but he's going to die like 8 days from now.
Yeah.
You know, that's a common thing in an Alan Sharp Western script. And so in a really cool way, Burt Lancaster gets waylaid in a really exciting event that happens in the third act, which allows Kinete to literally take over the lead of the movie. He becomes the hero of the film in the third act.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Burt Lancaster and Robert Aldrich's relationship with each other, because I'm sure, as we all know, Burt Lancaster also stars in Apache, where he actually plays an Apache who is the last Apache, and I think he's versus the Cherokee in that movie. Okay, so I'm watching this on the Kino Lorber Blu-ray. The Blu-ray has several special features on it. One is an audio commentary with film critic Nick Pinkerton, which I did not listen to yet. There is a Trailers from Hell, shout out to Joe Dante, with John Landis. And then there's this interview with Bruce Davidson. Okay, so...
Which was super entertaining.
Which was really entertaining. But then Bruce Davidson starts talking about the falling out that Burt Lancaster...
I can tell you about this. I know.
Yeah, tell us about it, because he apparently never spoke to him again.
Yeah, apparently he never spoke to him again. So I was really curious about this, especially with... Apparently it was over the edit. That's what he said.
He hated the ending, because then Bruce Davidson later comments on... Yeah, Bert and I used to sit around and talk about how great it would be to have like this big vista ending. You know, the cavalry is going by, a big Kubrickian shot. He actually said Kubrickian shot. And, you know, showing this magnificent vista, and, you know, Bert would be laying there, and, you know, the cavalry would be going by this big shot. And instead it's, you know, a shot of, it's a close up of a cigarette.
On the close of the cigarette, which I thought,
barely getting into his mouth.
Which I thought was like a really weird thing to end it on. So Quentin, what do you know about this?
Yeah, tell us.
Well, it's not that they never talked to each other again. All right. Because they did Gleaming.
Yeah, there you go.
2 movies later. All right. So
Bruce, there you go. Bruce Davidson.
There you go with that. All right. Robert Aldrich was one of the great first ADs of all time. He had a producing partner and writer, Ben Hecht, I believe it is. Harold Hecht or Ben Hecht.
Ben Hecht, yeah.
So they started a company, Lancaster, Aldrich, and Hecht Productions. And so they did Apache together. Robert Aldrich had already done a few films by this point in time, but Apache's his first real movie that was a hit with a big star. Then they followed it up with Aldrich's biggest movie at that time, which was Vera Cruz, which was a big smash for both Lancaster and Aldrich. And it also stars Gary Cooper, and, you know, Ernest Borgnine's in it, Charles Bronson's in it. It's a terrific film. Real predecessor to the spaghetti westerns. During Vera Cruz, because Lancaster was one of the producers of it, him and Aldrich started having problems because Lancaster really wanted to be a director at this point.
Okay.
And Lancaster, like, it started really taking over Lancaster's career, that he really wanted to direct. And since he felt he'd given Aldrich the shot with Vera Cruz, he started imposing more ideas on him until Aldrich couldn't handle it anymore. And so after Vera Cruz was over, that was it. They split up. Then Lancaster directed a film called, I'm looking at it right now, in the Kentuckian. All right, in the under the keep going. There you go. That's it. Okay, so Lancaster.
Gala just reaches over and pulls it from the shelves.
The Western section is right behind me.
Yeah. So he directed this movie called The Kentuckian, which is only okay. It has one terrific shot in it. But anyway, after Lancaster got a chance to direct his own movie, then he stopped kind of being so demonstrative about the directors doing his movies. And so they hadn't worked together throughout all the 60s, and then comes the 70s, then they worked together on Ulzana's Raid. And it was a big deal, Lancaster coming back. And he wanted the role. He really, really wanted the role. And so he wanted to, you know, make things right with Aldrich. And then they proceeded to, I can believe that they disagreed about the ending, but they, like, literally, they worked together again like 3 years later in 1977. Well, 4 years later with Twilight's Last Gleaming.
This is not available for streaming, as far as I can tell. I'm sure someone out there will send me a link and say, hey, it is available on this website. But I picked up a Kino Lorber Blu-ray, and it is really gorgeous. So if you don't have...
I actually would like to borrow that Blu-ray
well,
so I can listen to the Bruce Davidson interview and maybe even listen to the commentary track.
Yeah, there you go, Quentin. You may definitely borrow it.
Yeah, he quotes Aldrich, and one of my favorite quotes is, "The actors will step out of the hot burning lights." That was how he would end a shot.
At one point when I was watching the Blu-ray, Roger walked by and he said, wow, the VHS really looks like the Blu-ray.
The VHS actually was shockingly good.
Yeah, and so...
Beautiful.
Universal. The Universal did good transfers, man.
Yes. Yeah. So I picked up an MCA VHS just like the one in Video Archives for $25 from Frankie Latino's Video Vault.
Again, Frank Latina.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're actually kind of cheating here. We did not watch it on video. We watched it on Laserdisc, and it was gorgeous.
Yes.
Well, that's why it
looks... That's right. Actually, yeah, now that you mention it, that's why.
You didn't tell me that part.
That's why. You know what? You're right. You're right. But it had that weird side thing like...
That wasn't his problem.
Yes.